Welcome to the Cinnabar. Now, I'm cooped up in the shop on a stormy, blustery Sunday afternoon. But I thought, what better time to try to catch up on some of my own personal projects. So I went and grabbed this Winchester 1886 rifle. This one's a 40-65 octagon barrel, a pretty honest old shooter grade rifle that come into the shop the other day. But it has one pretty serious problem that keeps it from being a collector, or really a real good shooter, is that somebody turned Bubba loose with a hacksaw and we sawed this barrel off at about 21.5 inches and not even square cut. Shortened up the magazine tube, so it really turned this from a pretty honest old rifle to a good honest back half of the rifle and pretty much kind of junk on the front half. So you know, I really thought it would be worth it to try to buy it right as a parts gun, and I was able to do that. And then I got to digging around. I've really gathered up a lot of old Winchester barrels, and if you have old Winchester barrels around that you're not going to use, well, let me know, because I'm always in the market. But anyway, when I was digging around, I found a really nice condition 40-65 octagon 86 barrel here. Got a lot of bluing, and then, you know, I've always heard that there ain't no 10s, but the bore on this one is a good 9.9 if there isn't a 10, because it's about as close to a brand new bore on an old Winchester barrel as you can get. Now, it does have a problem that keeps it from being really a collector grade barrel, and that's the fact that we've lost a little length on this one too. It's been done right and on a lathe, but for those of you who watched the episode just recently I did on dovetails, we can tell right away that this used to be a longer barrel. Now, if you recall, we should have about 3/4 of an inch between the muzzle end of this barrel and the front edge of that dovetail, that front sight dovetail, but it's only got about 1/2 inch. And then this 1/4 turn circular dovetail for the magazine tube hanger should be 4 inches from the front of the barrel, and it's only 2. So we can say with relative certainty that this was a standard length 26-inch barrel at one time. But it's in such nice condition, it should just make an excellent shooter, and that's kind of what I'm hoping for. So I'm going to show you my process for changing out a barrel, and then as soon as we get a little break in the weather, we'll take it out to the range and just see if it shoots as well as I think it will. And I kind of have in the back of my mind that if it shoots really well, it might be an excellent candidate for a fall hunt here on the Cinnabar. And that is if somebody doesn't come into the shop and buy it off the rack before I get a chance to take it out hunting. So let's stick around. We'll show you about our process for changing out barrels, and then we'll take her to the range and see how she shoots. Now, the first thing we're going to do is drift out these sights. Now, the sights on this rifle are a 22 series Winchester rear sight and elevator, and they're a little later version than what we would find on this 86 originally. And then we've got a Beech's combination front sight here. It doesn't letter, so most likely it wasn't original to the rifle as well. But I just really like the sight picture I get with these sights. And remember, we're not making a collector gun here, we're making a shooter. So I'm going to go ahead and save these sights and put those back on the other barrel when we get it installed. Okay, so now what we're going to do, we'll work on this rear sight. We'll pull out the elevator and put just the tag that was around that barrel underneath it. That way we don't scratch the top of the barrel. And of course, this barrel is probably just a throwaway when we're done with it, but it's just a good practice. And it's drifting right out, no problem. So we'll set those aside, then we'll get this front sight, and hopefully it'll come out. Seems like I've had a rash of front sights that didn't want to come out lately. Oh, that one will come out easy. And that, of course, as we would have expected, is a hand filed in front dovetail, so it was a little bit loose. Okay, so now next thing we want to do, we're going to take this magazine tube out. So we're going to have to drift out the magazine tube retaining pin. And this one's kind of boogered up, and the dovetail on this is pretty bad. I think it's probably a hand cut job as well. Hopefully it'll hold enough that we don't just drive the whole thing out. Well, we got lucky on the sides, but this thing's not. There it goes. So we got, hopefully it's come all the way out. Yeah, there it is, and it looks like it was just a soft old nail or something. Alright, so that tube hopefully will come out. We'll go ahead and take the screw out that holds in the plug, and we're going to have to find a new screw and a plug because these are homemade little jobs here. And then of course we'll probably have to find a new magazine tube spring, because this one's probably going to be too short. I'm sure it'll be too short for a 24-inch barrel. This magazine tube's only, I don't know, 17, 18 inches long. And this is kind of a booger to get out of here. It's a homemade plug and it's really tight. There we go. Yeah, that spring's going to be too short. We can reuse the follower anyway. Okay, now let's see if we can get this tube out. Sometimes they can be a challenge, to say the least. Yep, and this one's going to be. So, looks like we may have to put a little go juice on this thing and let it soak a little bit. We'll use some Croil and some from this side, and then we'll put a little gun oil on the other side and let them soak a little bit, and be right back after a little bit. And we may have to introduce a little heat and maybe even grab onto that thing a little bit to get a little better traction. Alright, so now we've gone and had a coffee break and let this stuff soak in a little bit, and we'll give it a try here. Now if we can't get this by hand, then the next step is we add a little heat to our mag tube hanger, try to expand it a little bit, and then in a worst case scenario, then we'd have to try to grab onto this mag tube with something. But you know, avoid that at all costs, because it's so easy to damage a mag tube. So if you have to grab onto it, you need to make sure you've got something to support it inside so that you don't crush it, because they're pretty dainty, and something around the outside to protect from the jaws or whatever you're holding on to it. So what I do here from here is don't try to pull straight out, is we're going to try to, there, it's loosening up, try to work it back and forth a little bit, break the whatever's holding it, the kind of bonds there, and then after we've worked it back and forth a few times, then see if we can't start pulling it out. It's starting to move just a little bit. There we go. So we got fortunate. Now the reason I put the oil, gun oil, on this side is because the tube's going to come out this direction, so that's going to kind of pre-oil it as it comes through, and you can see that the oil on the mag tube that's showing up here. Now this, we're not going to reuse this mag tube, but it might come in handy someday, so we're going to try to save it. Boy, it is a tight one. Of course, I've felt a lot tighter over the years, so it's better than some, worse than most. Boy, we're going to put a little more gun oil in there. Seem to have come up to a really tight spot. It's just coming really slow. We'll see if we can't take the screws out of this fore-end nose cap and maybe relieve a little pressure there. Well, that one's boogered up. We're going to have to replace that one. Fortunately, we can still get enough of a bite on it that it come out. Okay, so that maybe relieved a little pressure. Let's see. There we go. That did the trick. Alrighty then. And that mag tube hanger just fell out of the dovetail. That's a hand cut dovetail there, so really wasn't properly done at all. Okay, so let's see if we can get this out without pounding it, and it looks like we're going to have to speed is. Alrighty. So there we go. We're ready to take it over the barrel vise and see how tough that barrel is going to be to get out of there. Now this is the homemade barrel vise we use here in the shop, and this one's patterned after the barrel vise in the gunsmithing lab at Lassen College in Susanville. We borrowed the design from them and just made it out of mostly scraps from here on the ranch. Now the base is just a worn out disc from one of our farm discs that we disc up our fields with. We got some 8-inch well casing here, and then some heavy scrap steel that we salvaged out of a scrap yard out here. And then the heart of it, of course, is a 20-ton bottle jack here, and our inserts here are just 6-inch piece of plywood. Now we get a really good surface to bite on, 6 inches of width. You know, little benchtop ones you maybe grab on to 1 inch of the barrel or so. I put some pieces of light leather in there just to kind of protect the barrels a little bit, but they really form to the barrels, and I've used these same 6-inch pieces of plywood for octagon barrels and round barrels and little 22 barrels and big heavy barrels. They just form to them. So anyway, let's go grab our barreled action and come over here and see if we can't get it broke loose. Alright, now after we got this fore end off, I went to lunch, but before I did, I put some penetrating oil down around the threads here and let them soak in. Now I use Croil, but you know, use whatever your preferred penetrating oil is. Now we're just going to set this barrel in, sandwich it in between these two plywood inserts and the thin layers of leather here, and insert it into our vise. And we'll tighten it up just a little bit. And at this point, before I forget, we need to open the action just a little bit, just enough to get the extractor out of the extractor notch, because we're not going to get this receiver turning off of that barrel with that extractor in there. Okay, so now I like to add a little bit of heat. It doesn't take a whole bunch, but it just helps to maybe break that thing loose just a little bit more. So we'll get it to where it's too hot to hold your hand on, but we're not just making it cooking hot. Okay, and when we do that, we concentrate on that heat out on the receiver so that maybe it'll expand that receiver a little bit. We don't want to concentrate the heat on the barrel. We don't want to expand the barrel, of course. And I leave the internals in. I do pull the bolt back some, but it gives it a little more rigidity to the receiver there, and maybe we'll have a little less chance of crushing the receiver that way. And we're going to put this action wrench. This is my homemade Thor's hammer action wrench. It's a big one. We want to get some leverage on this thing. And I've never had a situation where I've hurt a receiver with it, but sometimes it does take a little force. Okay, and then what I do, and maybe it's a little overkill, is I measure the top and the bottom just to make sure that we've got it on there pretty evenly. And we don't very well, so we'll grab our 3/4 inch wrench over here, loosen up the bottom, tighten the top some, and then tighten it up pretty good. Alright, so now we'll really crank down on this 20-ton jack, so we've got a good bite on that barrel. And see how she goes. Sometimes they go real easy. From the looks of this one, I wouldn't be surprised if this barrel's not been off since it was brand new. Oh, it come pretty darned easy. So we're good. So I'll go ahead and take this action wrench off. And we're always careful not to scratch anything up with this action wrench. And I've got it lined with some thin pieces of leather right in here to keep it from scratching the receiver at all. Now we should be able to just unscrew this receiver off of the barrel. That penetrating oil does the job because we've got wet threads all the way to the front shoulder. It's kind of amazing how in, maybe an hour, it completely penetrated full length of those threads. Alright, there we are. We'll go grab that other barrel and show you how the opposite side works, putting it back together. Okay, so while we were away, we cleaned up these threads on this barrel really well, and then we cleaned the internal threads on the receiver real well, got that penetrating oil off, and any junk or crud or corrosion that was in there. And now it's time to just go in reverse order to put this receiver back on this barrel. Now some people use some kind of a never cease compound. I just don't think it's necessary, so I don't. If you do think that that's advisable, then by all means use it. Now I'm going to try to get this barrel, the top flat, pretty level here, and then we'll tighten it up. Okay, and now we'll start this receiver back on. Now if the threads haven't been messed with on either the barrel or the receiver, then it should index up properly. Rarely have I come across any of these Winchesters that didn't index up right, unless something has been altered, and I don't think anything has been altered either on the barrel or the receiver. Be really careful if you cross thread these things. Of course, it's a pain in the backside unless you got a lathe to clean those threads back up. And even if you have a lathe, it's a pain in the backside. Particularly the internal threads on the receiver. Okay, so now our top flat's here and we're off at this angle here like this, so looks like it's going to index up just right. Now you may be wondering how we're going to get it just perfectly indexed up, and we're going to show you that here in just a minute, but the short answer is we eyeball it. But we use a little kind of a hack, a cheat method to improve our ability to eyeball it. Okay, looks like we're pretty close. We'll tighten her up. Alright, so I'm going to get it almost there, and then we're going to go get a couple of straight edges to help us see exactly when we're indexed up properly. Okay, be right back. Okay, now we're looking from the back of the receiver here, and here's what we have for our little helpers, and we just need a couple of straight edges. I use these blocks because they'll kind of sit right on the barrel here and on across the receiver here, and now we can see the difference between these. See the end of this one is higher than this one, so we know that the receiver needs to move in this direction, kind of in a clockwise direction, to get these things leveled up. So we'll set these aside and give it another crank. There, we tightened it up a little bit, and it takes a little bit of trial and error, but we'll get there eventually. And so, you know, it's pretty obvious if they're not quite lined up. And we're still not quite there. We'll try it again. There, we went a little further. That was not exactly how we had that planned. Okay, and here. And voila, that's just about as perfect as it can get right there. So we're done. It's time to put things back together. Okay, now we've gathered up all the parts we need to put this thing back together and found a little longer magazine tube spring and an end cap, and time to put her back together. So first thing, we'll put on the fore end here, and it's a little tighter fit now. That barrel's maybe just a shade wider than the original was. Now we'll put tenon in and fore end cap. Okay, now the fun part, we'll put in this mag tube hanger. Always a little nerve-wracking when one's been boogered up a little like this one has. Now I just use a little piece of 86 mag tube that I had laying around just to use to twist it into position. Oh, that one's going to go real nice. That's a nice fit. Sometimes they can be a bit of a challenge. There we go. All right, now we'll see how this mag tube goes in. We're not going to put the screws in to the fore end cap until we get this tube in. So we know that it was kind of tight coming out, so we'll want to make sure that it isn't too tight going in. Now we're getting tight through this hanger. There we go, it's loosened up. So now to get everything lined up and in there, always interesting with these old rifles. There we go. And if we have to, we can get a little more leverage. There it goes. Just right. Okay, so now, there we go, right into place. All right, now we've got our magazine tube follower. We're going to slide that in there, and now we'll put in our mag tube spring. And cap. Try not to lose that little screw. Some of these caps can be a little tight, of course. And the end of that spring always wants to stick out there and make it so you can't get the cap in there easily. There we go. Now let's get a proper screwdriver. Twist that cap in there the way it belongs. And these things don't have much of a slot in them, so it's really easy to booger up these ends, and this one's already been boogered up some. So we're going to try not to do it anymore. And there we go, just right. I'm going to find that little screw now. There it is. All right, now we've got a couple of things that we need to remember And it's really easy to forget sometimes we're putting these things back together. That little retaining pin that goes in the mag tube hanger down here. And we'll get that one punched in. Perfect. Alright, and then of course we've got a couple little screws now to put in this nose cap. And it's just a little bit, so that dovetail was just in a little bit different spot on that other barrel, so I'm going to tap this down a little bit because it isn't lined up just right, but I think they'll go. And sometimes those the tenon can be turned around, and the screw holes are a little bit offset one way or the other, so you can make kind of adjustments there if they're not quite right. But like I say, I think this one's going to go. We might have to coax it a little bit. Nope, there it goes. It was just a little off, but it was enough that these screws are going to take. We're ready to put the sights in now anyway. We'll drift in these sights real quick. We got our Beech's combination front sight here. Get that started real good, and then we'll use a brass punch to get it kind of centered. Get it started anyway, getting this thing sighted in. Now our rear sight, and remember we're going to use something between the sight and the barrel to keep from scratching the barrel up while we drift that sight in. Okay, now we're just going to pull that out and put our elevator in. And we're good to go. Now we just have to look for a little break in the weather. We can get this old girl out and see how she shoots. Okay, so we got a little break in the weather here. We got a beautiful spring day out here on the ranch, so it's time to bring this old 86 out here and see if she's going to shoot as accurately as I'm hoping for with this new barrel on it. Now 4065 isn't a caliber that I load for, so I had to dig around and I found an old package of Lodex Cowboy Action 4065. So if this thing shoots really well, we're going to have to get some dies and load some black powder for it, but until then we'll shoot some of these Cowboy Action loads. Now I've just got a target out there at about 25 yards because of course we put these sights on and hopefully we've got them close, but we won't know till we can get a couple of shots on paper. And of course the way ammo is these days, we don't want to waste any, so let's take a couple of shots here right up close and see if she's on paper, and if we have to make some adjustments then we'll move back a little bit and see if we can't group this thing up with these Cowboy Action loads anyway. Alrighty, so here we go. Alright, oh, I like that sight picture. Alrighty, so here we go, get it lined up. Okay, let's have a look at that brass. Everything looks just right. Take one more shot, see if we're grouping it all. Okay, let's see how we did. Okay, I think we did all right as far as putting those sights in there and getting fairly close. So we've got one here just a little low and a ½ inch to the right, and a little high and ½ inch to the right. So I think we'll move that front side a little bit, try to get our windage figured out, and move back a little and try her again. Now interestingly, when I was setting up here, a whole group of mule deer kind of fed out right back there into the meadow, and I figured for sure once I started shooting, well, that'd be the end of them, but They don't seem to be paying any attention. They're still just feeding out there on the edge of the meadow. We'll get them a little desensitized, and maybe when hunting season comes around they won't be so skittery. Okay, so now we're back at about 75 yards, and if you look over the top of the gun back that way at the base of a juniper, you see one or two white spots. That's those mule deer back there. We'll see if they actually spook this time when we shoot. Okay, so let's see if we're going to be, yeah, looks like that's going to work. Alrighty, get our glasses on here. And I'm not entirely sure I moved that front side any. It didn't need to be moved much, and sometimes it's difficult to see whether you've got it moved or not. Them deer are still just sitting back there. They don't care a bit that we're shooting here. Okay, we've got a couple of shots in. Let's go see what we've done. And our friends are still back there. I guess we're really spooking them old mule deer. They're just feeding right out into the meadow just after we took those last two shots. But anyway, we got just one ragged hole with those last two shots right there. About a ½ inch high and dead on for windage. Doesn't get much better than that. So hopefully there's a few bucks in that group over there, and they'll just hang around here till hunting season. Of course, we can't see any antlers yet. They just shed their last year's antlers, but looks like this might be a great old hunting rifle after all. So we're going to have to do a little load development, because I don't know what in the world those loads were, you know, being a factory cowboy action load. But it's going to be a little fun developing them. We'll invite you folks along. Maybe we'll do a video on load development for 4065. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I've had a blast. Until next time, happy trails from the Cinnabar.